"Stand beside me," Alpha Marcus commanded, his voice a resonant thunder that stilled the great hall. For one fragile, impossible heartbeat, Amanda's pulse soared. She imagined his hand reaching for hers, a reprieve from years of being the Stone River's invisible shadow. But as she stepped forward, the obsidian in his eyes turned to ice. He didn't reach for her. He pointed toward the heavy oak doors, where a predatory blizzard screamed. "I cast out the taint," he roared. "You are banished, Amanda of No Wolf. Go to the White Death. You are nothing." In front of her silent, weeping parents, he didn't just reject a mate, he discarded a human soul. The great hall of the Stone River Pack smelled of roasting venison, cedar smoke, and the heavy metallic tang of anticipation. It was the night of the Unity Moon, the sacred time when the Alpha's power was meant to be solidified by the choosing of a mate. For Amanda, it was simply another night of service. She stood near the kitchen entrance, her fingers tracing the small, silver thimble tucked into the pocket of her thin linen tunic. The thimble was her only inheritance, a tiny, dented thing that had belonged to her grandmother. It was the tool she used to mend the warriors' heavy cloaks and the pups' torn blankets. It was a symbol of her life, small, functional, and easily overlooked. Her hands were chapped from the lye soap and the biting draft that snaked through the stone corridors. At 20, she was a wolfless omega, a biological anomaly in a pack that prized strength above all else. While other women preened in furs, Amanda moved like a ghost, her own wolf silent and dormant, a prisoner in a cage she couldn't find. "Look at her," Beth, the beta's daughter, whispered as she passed, her silk dress shimmering like oil on water. "She actually thinks he's looking her way. Poor, pathetic thing." Amanda kept her head down. She didn't want the crown. She only wanted a place where the air didn't feel like a threat. She had harbored a secret, flickering admiration for Marcus, not for his power, but for the way he had once looked at her when they were children, before the world told him she was a broken thing. Then came the roar. Then came the rejection. The enforcers didn't give her a coat. They didn't let her say goodbye. The silver thimble felt like a hot coal in her pocket as they dragged her through the mud and into the screaming white maw of the storm. Liam, a guard who had once thanked her for fixing his daughter's favorite doll, avoided her eyes as he shoved her past the boundary line. "Don't look back, Amanda," he muttered, his breath a plume of regret. "If you're seen again, they'll hunt you as a rogue. Just run." The creek at the border was half frozen, a jagged ribbon of black water. When she fell into it, the shock was so profound, it felt like her heart had shattered into 1,000 jagged crystals. She scrambled up the muddy bank, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The wind was a physical weight, a wall of ice pushing her toward the dark forest. She ran until her legs were no longer hers. She ran until the scent of the Stone River Pack faded, replaced by the sterile, biting smell of deep snow. The world turned into a blur of gray and white, a sensory deprivation chamber where the only sound was the thudding of her own failing heart. And then, through the veil of ice, she saw it. A dilapidated barn, its timber silvered by age, leaning precariously against the wind. It was a ruin, a skeleton of human history. But to Amanda, it was a cathedral. She threw her weight against the rotting door. It groaned, a low, guttural protest, before giving way. Inside, the air was still, heavy with the scent of ancient hay and dry rot. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't the wind. She collapsed into a pile of dusty straw in the corner, her body trembling so violently she couldn't feel her own limbs. She pulled the silver thimble from her pocket, clutching it against her chest. "I am mending myself," she thought, a delirious laugh bubbling in her throat. One last stitch. As the cold settled into her marrow, a strange peace washed over her. The silence of her wolf didn't feel like a failure anymore. It felt like a mercy. She wouldn't have to feel the animal's terror as they died together. Her eyes began to flutter shut. The darkness of the barn was soft, like velvet. But just as the veil of sleep began to pull her under, the heavy scent of the storm outside changed. It was no longer just ice and pine. It was the smell of rich earth, of wild musk, and of a heat so intense it felt like a summer forge. A low, deep rumble vibrated through the floorboards, a sound like a cat's purr, but 1,000 times more primal. Amanda's eyes snapped open for one final second. In the shadows of the barn, 10 pairs of eyes ignited like gold and silver embers. She wasn't alone. Amanda drifted in a feverish haze, caught between the memory of the ice and a reality that felt like a sunstroke. She expected the sting of frostbite, the slow, agonizing shutdown of her lungs. Instead, she felt a heavy, radiating heat pressing against her from every side. It was a living furnace, rhythmic and deep. When she finally forced her eyelids open, the silver thimble was still pressed into her palm, the metal warm against her skin. Her vision cleared, and the breath hitched in her throat. She was buried in fur. Massive, powerful bodies were draped over her legs, pressed against her back, and curled around her shoulders. To her left, a wolf, the color of sun-scorched earth, let out a long, contented sigh in its sleep, its heavy head resting inches from her hip. Behind her, she felt the massive, steady heartbeat of a creature so large, its ribcage felt like a wall of muscle. Her first instinct was a primal, jagged terror. This was a rogue pack. In the stories the Stone River elders told, rogues were mindless beasts, feral and cruel, who kept captives for sport or food. She tried to scramble backward, her movements jerky and weak. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking like dry parchment. "I have nothing. You've made a mistake." The wolves stirred. One by one, massive heads lifted. These were not the lean, hungry wolves of the northern territories. They were titans. Their fur was thick and lustrous, smelling of rain-drenched cedar and ozone. A wolf of pure, snowy white, an impossibility in these lands, opened eyes of a piercing, human blue. It didn't snarl. It simply watched her with a devastating intelligence that made her feel more seen than she had in 20 years at Stone River. "I'm wolfless," Amanda stammered, tears of shame blurring her vision. She held up the silver thimble as if it were a shield, or perhaps an offering. "I'm just an omega. I'm a leech. Marcus said so. If you're looking for a mate or a warrior, I can't give you anything. I only know how to mend what's broken." She was making the oldest mistake of the discarded. She was trying to negotiate her own worthlessness. She truly believed that if she confessed her uselessness early enough, the disappointment of her captors wouldn't hurt as much when they inevitably threw her back into the snow. The massive black wolf behind her, the one whose heat had kept her heart beating through the midnight hours, rose to its feet. It dwarfed the others, a midnight shadow that seemed to swallow the dim light of the barn. The transformation was silent. It wasn't the violent, bone-snapping spectacle of the Stone River shifts. It was a fluid, graceful transition, like ink dissolving in water. Where the beast had stood, a man now knelt in the straw. He was broad-shouldered and scarred, his skin bronzed and marked with swirling patterns that looked less like tattoos and more like the history of 1,000 battles. His hair was a wild mane of black, and one eye was bisected by a jagged scar, yet the gaze he leveled at her was impossibly tender. "We didn't follow the scent of an omega," the man said. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder vibrating through the floorboards. "My name is Caleb," he continued, reaching out but stopping his hand a respectful distance from her. "And we haven't made a mistake, Amanda. For 20 years, the world has lied to you, and you've started to believe the lie. Amanda gripped the thimble tighter, the edges denting her skin. I'm nothing. I'm just a girl who was left to die. Caleb's scarred face softened into a sad, dangerous smile. He gestured to the 9 wolves surrounding them, the silver, the red, the mottled gray, all watching her with a reverence that felt like a physical weight. You think you're in a barn with rogues, Caleb whispered, but you're sitting in the center of a prophecy. We are the unchained. We have crossed a continent not to find a servant, but to find the one who was promised. Amanda looked at the holes in the barn roof, the light of the rising sun beginning to poke through like golden needles. Promised? To who? Caleb knelt lower, placing his forehead near her hand in a gesture of absolute submission. To the world, he said, and to us. The cage Marcus built around you is breaking, Amanda. Can't you hear it? For the first time, Amanda didn't hear the wind. She didn't hear the rot of the barn. Deep inside her chest, behind a wall she hadn't known existed, she heard a sound that made her blood turn to liquid fire. It was a growl, and it wasn't coming from the wolves around her. The growl inside Amanda's chest wasn't a sound. It was a vibration, a tectonic shift in the foundation of her soul. It felt like a door, rusted shut for decades, finally being kicked open from the inside. She gasped, her hand flying to her throat as if to catch the sound before it escaped. What is that?" she whispered, her eyes wide with a terror that was rapidly being replaced by an intoxicating, terrifying heat. Caleb reached out, his hand hovering near hers. He didn't touch her. Not yet. He waited for her permission. "That is the sound of a queen waking up," he said, "and the sound of a cage breaking." He gestured to the white wolf, Elias, who shifted with that same liquid grace, becoming a lean man with eyes as sharp as glass. "Show her, Elias," Caleb commanded softly. Elias stepped forward and knelt, his voice formal and resonant. "My lady, when you were born under the red moon, the elders of Stone River didn't see a child. They saw a threat. A lunar matriarch is a rare alignment, the strength of an alpha and the soul of an omega in a single vessel. You are a binder of packs, a healer of the fractured, but more importantly to them, you are a power they could never control." Amanda's mind spun. She looked down at the silver thimble in her hand. It felt heavier now, almost pulsing. "But my parents, they told me I was born empty. They said I was a bad omen. They looked at me with such pity." "It wasn't pity, Amanda," Caleb said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, sorrowful whisper. "It was guilt. They didn't want a dead daughter, so they chose to give the alpha a broken one. They went to a hedge witch on the night of your first moon. They didn't just mute your wolf, they stitched her shut." The word stitched hit Amanda harder than Marcus's rejection. She looked at the thimble, the tool of her life's work, the tool of mending, and realized the cruel irony. Her parents had used the metaphor of mending to justify the mutilation of her spirit. They had mended her into something small so she wouldn't be hunted. "They bound your scent," Elias added, his blue eyes shimmering with a reflected rage. "They used a tether of pack loyalty to keep the seal tight. As long as you stayed within Stone River, as long as you accepted Marcus as your alpha, the cage held. You felt empty because you were being drained, day by day, to feed the strength of a pack that hated you." Amanda stood up, her legs surprisingly steady. The heat was spreading now, moving from her chest into her limbs. The barn, which had felt like a tomb an hour ago, now felt like a chrysalis. "So, when Marcus rejected me," she began, the realization dawning like a cold sun. "He made the greatest mistake of his life," Caleb finished, standing to join her. "By casting you out, by publicly severing your bond to the Stone River Pack. He didn't just exile you. He broke the seal. He snapped the very threads that held your wolf in the dark. He thought he was throwing away a leech. Instead, he released a storm. Caleb finally reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. The moment his skin met hers, a jolt of silver light arced between them. Amanda gasped, but she didn't pull away. The sensation wasn't a burn. It was a homecoming. On the palm of her hand, right beneath where she held the thimble, a mark began to glow. It was a faint, swirling silver crescent, mirroring the one on Caleb's own hand. "We are the Unchained," Caleb said, his voice filling the barn, echoing off the ancient beams. "We have no alpha because we serve only the matriarch. We have waited in the shadows of this continent for the scent of moon silver and winter. Last night, that scent exploded across the sky like a beacon." He knelt then, and one by one, the other 9 men, some in human form, some still in the magnificent shapes of the great wolves, bowed their heads to the floor. "You are not a rogue, Amanda," Caleb whispered. "You are the end of the old ways." Amanda looked from the glowing mark on her hand to the 10 devoted faces. For 20 years, she had been a mender of rags and a servant of scraps. She looked at the silver thimble, then slowly, she let it fall. It hit the straw with a soft thud, a tiny piece of her old life discarded in the dust. The growl in her chest became a roar. "Show me," she said, her voice no longer a whisper, but a command that made the very air in the barn tremble. "Show me who I am." The next 3 days were a blur of fire and starlight. The dilapidated barn, once a monument to Amanda's despair, had been transformed into a sanctuary of primal power. Ronan and Finn, the swiftest of the guard, brought back fresh venison and pine water, sharing it with Amanda as equals. There were no scraps here. There was only the circle. But the physical training was the easy part. The true battle was within. "The cage is open, Amanda, but the gate is rusted shut," Caleb explained on the second morning. They sat in the center of the barn, the other 9 men forming a wide, protective perimeter. "For 20 years, you were told to be small. You were told that silence was your only safety. To shift, you must give up that safety. You must be willing to be loud." Amanda sat cross-legged in the straw, her eyes closed. She was trying to reach for the spark she had felt before, but every time she touched it, a wave of phantom pain, the memory of the hedge witch's binding, made her flinch. "Don't pull at it like an alpha trying to dominate a subordinate," Elias advised, his voice calm. "You are a matriarch. You don't command the wolf. You welcome her home. This isn't a conquest. It's a reunion." "Think of the mending, Amanda," Gabriel, the healer, added softly. "You spent your life stitching together the rags of others. Now, turn that needle inward. Stitch the girl to the wolf. Heal the divide." Amanda breathed in the scent of the barn, the dry hay, the musk of the 10 men who had sworn their lives to her, and the sharp, ozone tang of the coming storm. She thought of the silver thimble she had dropped in the straw. She realized she no longer needed the tool because she was the vessel. She let herself go. She stopped fighting the memory of the cold hall. She leaned into the rage, not a bitter, petty rage, but a vast, righteous ocean of it. She felt the betrayal of her parents, the sneer of Beth, and the icy contempt of Marcus. "I am here," she thought, directed at the silent void inside her. "I am sorry I let them keep you in the dark." The response was a white-hot explosion. Amanda's scream wasn't human. It was a sound of rending metal and cracking ice. Her bones didn't just break. They dissolved and reformed in a symphony of agony and light. The 10 men surged forward, not to stop her, but to anchor her. Their hands pressed against her shoulders, her back. their own alpha energy pouring into her like a grounding wire during a lightning strike. "Stay with it!" Caleb roared over the sound of the wind, suddenly whipping through the barn slats. "Let the moon in, Amanda!" The light that erupted from her was blinding, a pearlescent, silvery glow that turned the dusty barn into a hall of diamonds. When the light finally receded, the men were thrown back by the sheer pressure of the energy. Where the girl had been, a titan now stood. She was larger than Caleb's black wolf, her fur not the dull white of a winter fox, but a shimmering, incandescent pearlescence that seemed to hold the glow of 1,000 moons. Her eyes were wide, luminous pools of liquid silver. She was terrifying. She was beautiful. She was the lunar wolf. A single howl ripped from her throat, a sound so ancient and powerful that the glass in the barn's few remaining windows shattered. It echoed across the valley, a challenge to every alpha who had ever built a throne on the backs of the weak. In the silence that followed, Caleb shifted and approached her. He didn't growl. He bowed his massive black head, a silent acknowledgement of a power that eclipsed his own. Amanda leaned her heavy velvet head against his shoulder, a rumble of contentment vibrating through her new form. But 2 miles away, at the edge of the Stone River territory, the peace was already being poisoned. A scout named David lowered his binoculars, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped them. He had been sent by Marcus to find a corpse to display as a warning. Instead, he had seen a goddess born in a ruin. He didn't wait to see more. He turned and ran toward the Stone River Hall, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Alpha!" David gasped an hour later, bursting through the doors of the Great Hall, where Marcus sat brooding over a failing hunt. "The Omega. She isn't dead. And she isn't alone." Marcus stood, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, not alone?" "She has an army, Alpha," David whispered, the terror in his voice silencing the entire room. 10 monsters. And the girl, she isn't an Omega anymore. She's turned into something that glows like the moon. She's coming for us. Marcus's face contorted, not with fear, but with a desperate, wounded pride. He looked at Beth, who was already whispering about witches and dark magic. "Gather the war pack," Marcus commanded, his voice a low, jagged growl. 20 warriors. We end this heresy tonight. We will bring the Omega back in chains, or we won't bring her back at all." The blue hour of dusk descended upon the valley, turning the snow into a field of crushed sapphires. Inside the barn, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and iron. Amanda stood by the heavy oak doors, her human form draped in a heavy charcoal cloak Gabriel had fashioned for her. She didn't feel the cold anymore. The furnace of the lunar wolf burned steadily behind her ribs, a quiet, golden hum. "They are here," Ronan whispered, his ears twitching. He stood by a gap in the timber, his hand resting on the hilt of a hunting knife. Caleb stepped up beside Amanda. He was in his human form, bare-chested despite the sub-zero temperatures, his skin radiating a low, visible heat. 22 wolves, he said, his voice a calm, tectonic rumble. "Marcus, the Beta's daughter, and 20 of their strongest warriors. They aren't here for a trial, Amanda. They are here for an execution." Amanda looked down at the straw. Somewhere beneath the golden stalks lay her silver thimble, buried and forgotten. She realized she no longer needed to stitch things back together. Some things were meant to be torn apart so that something new could grow. "Let them come," she said. Her voice was different now, lower, resonant, carrying the weight of the earth itself. With a strength that defied her slender frame, she shoved the barn doors open. The hinges screamed, a jagged sound that cut through the silence of the valley. They emerged from the tree line like a moving bruise across the white landscape. 22 wolves, mostly grays and browns, their breath huffing in rhythmic plumes of steam. At their head was a massive, mottled brown wolf with eyes like obsidian. Marcus. He strode into the clearing, his paws crunching rhythmically in the ice. He didn't shift immediately. He circled the barn, his hackles raised, a low, vibratory snarl rippling through the air. He was looking for the monsters David had described. He saw only a girl in a cloak and a scarred man. Marcus shifted, his human form emerging with a violent, arrogant snap of bone. He stood naked and unashamed in the snow, his alpha presence flaring like a dark sun. Omega, he boomed, his voice echoing off the valley walls. You are charged with high treason. You have consorted with rogues and raised a shadow army against your true blood and territory. Surrender now, and I may grant you the mercy of a quick end. From behind him, Beth stepped forward, wrapped in a plush fox fur stole. Her face was a mask of venomous triumph. He's being too kind, Amanda. You always were a parasite. Now you've brought these filth to our borders? We should burn this barn with you inside. Amanda took a single step out into the snow. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but she didn't flinch. She looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and saw not a god, but a frightened man clinging to a crumbling throne. A true alpha protects his pack, Marcus, Amanda said, her voice clear and sharp as a mountain stream. You didn't protect me. You used your strength to break the weakest among you because it made you feel powerful. You didn't just reject a mate. You betrayed the goddess herself. Marcus laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. The goddess? You are a wolfless leech. You have no right to speak of divinity. She is not an Omega, Caleb intervened, stepping forward to stand at Amanda's shoulder. His power rolled off him in palpable, suffocating waves, forcing the Stone River warriors to take an involuntary step back. And you are not her alpha. Marcus's eyes widened as he took in Caleb, the sheer size of him, the ancient scars, the dominance that made Marcus's own alpha aura feel like a flickering candle. But it was Amanda's hand that truly broke his composure. Amanda lifted her palm. The silver crescent mark burned with an ethereal white light, pulsing in time with the moon rising behind the trees. The matriarch has chosen, Caleb stated. It wasn't a boast. It was a law of nature. Liar! Beth shrieked, her face contorting with a jealous rage that bordered on madness. She stole that. She's a witch! Without a command, Beth shifted. In a blur of fur and teeth, she launched herself across the snow. She didn't go for Caleb. She went for Amanda's throat, her jaws snapping with a sound like a closing trap. The Stone River warriors let out a collective howl of aggression, but the world didn't slow down for Amanda. It simply opened up. She didn't shift. She didn't even move her feet. As Beth's wolf form reached the apex of its leap, Amanda reached out a single, slender hand. She caught the massive wolf by the throat in midair. The impact was a sickening thud. Amanda's arm didn't tremble. Her feet didn't slide an inch in the snow. She held the choking, thrashing Beta's daughter aloft, her silver eyes boring into Beth's panicked yellow ones. You took nothing from me, Amanda whispered, a low, terrifying vibration. A wave of pure, lunar energy, white as magnesium, erupted from Amanda's palm. It wasn't a physical blow, but a projection of sheer will. Beth was thrown backward 20 feet, her body slamming into the trunk of a frozen pine. She hit the ground and shifted back into her human form, unconscious and broken. The silence that followed was absolute. The 20 Stone River warriors lowered their heads, their tails tucking between their legs as they felt the true weight of the power standing before them. Marcus stared at Beth's limp body, then back at Amanda. His face turned a shade of gray that matched the winter sky. What are you? he whispered, his voice cracking. Amanda let her cloak fall into the snow, revealing the glowing mark on her skin. I am the consequence of your pride, Marcus. Behind her, the barn seemed to explode, not with fire, but with shadow and fur. 10 giants emerged, their forms expanding, their bones lengthening until they stood a full head taller than any wolf Marcus had ever seen. The Unchained had arrived. The valley was a tableau of frozen violence. The 10 dire wolves of the Unchained stood like statues of shadow and moonlight, their fangs glinting like ivory daggers. Facing them, the 20 Stone River warriors had collapsed into a submissive huddle, their bellies to the snow, whimpering in a frequency of terror that only wolves could hear. Alpha Marcus stood alone in the center of the clearing, his naked skin turning a bruised purple in the biting wind. He looked at the monsters surrounding him, then at the woman who commanded them. His pride, once a towering fortress, had been reduced to rubble in a matter of seconds. "Kill me," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. He looked at Beth's broken form by the tree, then back at Amanda. "If this is the goddess's justice, then end it. I won't be a footstool for a rogue queen." Amanda felt the power of the lunar wolf surging through her veins, a white-hot, addictive song that told her to strike him down. She could feel the dire wolves behind her, their muscles coiled, waiting for the single mental command that would tear the Stone River leadership to shreds. For 20 years, she had been the recipient of his cruelty. For 20 years, she had been hungry, cold, and silent. Make him feel it, the darker part of her soul whispered. Make them all feel the ice. But then, she felt a different pulse. It was the memory of the silver thimble, now lost in the straw of the barn. She thought of the thousands of tiny, invisible stitches she had made to keep the pups warm and the warriors clothed. She had spent her life mending things that were torn. "Vengeance is a stone, Marcus," Amanda said, her voice carrying across the valley with a quiet, absolute authority. "You can carry it until it breaks your back, or you can drop it and build something with it." She stepped toward him, the snow crunching softly under her boots. Caleb moved with her, his massive black form a silent, protective shadow at her side. "I'm not going to kill you," she said. Marcus looked up, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "Why? I sent you to die. I rejected your soul." "Because a queen does not build her house with the bones of the broken," Amanda replied. She turned her gaze to the huddled warriors. "Get up, all of you." As the warriors scrambled to their feet, 2 figures stumbled forward from the tree line, their faces etched with a desperate, agonizing hope. Thomas and Sarah, Amanda's parents, fell to their knees at the edge of the clearing. "Amanda!" Sarah wailed, her hands reaching out into the cold air. "Forgive us. We did it to keep you safe. We knew what you were. We knew the old Alpha would have killed a matriarch in the cradle." Amanda felt a fresh wave of ice settle in her chest. She walked toward them, her silver eyes glowing with a terrifying intensity. "You kept me safe?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut like a blade. "You hired a witch to stitch my soul shut. You watched me eat scraps and sleep in corners for 20 years. You let the world believe I was empty so you didn't have to be brave. The prophecy," Thomas choked out, his face pale. "It said the matriarch would rise in the time of the blood moon. We thought if we hid you, the time would never come. We thought we could stop fate." "You didn't save my life," Amanda said, leaning down so her face was inches from theirs. "You stole it. You made me a target for the very cruelty you say you feared." She stood up, pulling her charcoal cloak tight. The mercy she had shown Marcus was not for them, not yet. This was blood, and blood ran deeper than pack law. "You will stand before the entire Stone River pack," Amanda commanded. "You will tell them every lie you whispered. You will unbury the secrets that have poisoned this territory for a generation. Atonement is a long road, and yours begins with the truth." She turned back to Marcus, who was watching the scene with a dawning, horrific realization of his own complicity in a lie he hadn't even understood. "This barn will be rebuilt," Amanda declared, pointing to the ruin behind her. "Not as a shelter for the dying, but as a great hall for the allied packs. You, Marcus, and your warriors will do the labor with your own hands. You will learn what it is to serve the house you tried to burn down." Marcus bowed his head until his forehead touched the frozen earth. "I accept," he whispered, the words torn from a place of genuine humility. "I will serve." Amanda looked at the 10 wolves of her guard. They shifted back into their human forms, one by one, their faces filled with a fierce, quiet pride. They weren't looking at a destroyer. They were looking at a healer. "The night is over," Amanda said, her voice softening as the silver light in her eyes began to fade into a warm, human gray. "Go home. The blood moon is coming, and when it arrives, we will be a single pack, or we will be nothing at all." As the Stone River wolves began to retreat into the forest, carrying the unconscious Beth and the weeping parents, Caleb approached Amanda. He didn't speak. He simply reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. The valley was silent now, the only sound the distant, lonely howl of the wind. Amanda looked back at the barn, the place where an Omega had come to die, and a queen had been born. 3 weeks later, the valley was no longer a place of white silence. The sound of hammers hitting nails and the rhythmic rasp of saws echoed against the pines. The White Death had begun to recede, leaving behind a world of muddy browns and vibrant, emerging greens. The barn was no longer a ruin. Under the direction of Elias, the Stone River warriors had worked until their hands bled and their muscles ached. They had replaced the rotting timbers with stout, scented cedar and reinforced the stone foundation. It was no longer a place where things went to die. It was becoming a place where the world would meet. Amanda stood in the center of the new hall, watching the sunlight stream through the wide, clear windows. She wore a dress of soft wool, dyed the color of a twilight sky, and a silver circlet rested lightly on her brow, a gift from the Unchained, forged from the silver of the northern mines. She knelt in the corner, near the spot where she had first collapsed in the straw. The ground had been cleared and swept, but as she ran her fingers over the new floorboards, she saw a glint of metal caught in a gap. She reached down, her heart skipping a beat. It was the silver thimble. It was flattened on one side, scarred by the heavy boots of warriors and the shifting of timber. She picked it up, cleaning the dirt from its surface with her thumb. It looked small and fragile in her palm, a relic of a girl who had been afraid of her own shadow. "You still keep it," a voice rumbled behind her. She didn't need to turn to know it was Caleb. His presence was a constant, warm weight at her back, a steady heartbeat that hummed in sync with her own. He stepped up beside her, his hand resting gently on the small of her back. "It reminds me that mending isn't just about hiding the holes," Amanda said, looking at the dented metal. "It's about making the fabric stronger where it was once torn." She looked out the open doors. In the clearing, Marcus was helping Liam lift a heavy beam. The former Alpha's face was leaner, his eyes clearer. He wasn't a king anymore, but he looked like a man who finally understood the weight of the earth. Near the tree line, she saw her parents. They weren't kneeling anymore. They were talking to Gabriel, the healer, learning how to prepare the herbs that would be needed for the nursery. They still looked at her with a mixture of awe and regret, but the mountain between them was beginning to crumble into a path. "The scouts say the blood moon is only a week away," Caleb said, his voice dropping. "The horizon is already beginning to tarnish." "I know," Amanda replied. She tucked the thimble into a small velvet pouch at her waist. But we aren't 10 wolves in a barn anymore. We are a pack. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the matriarch has her guard. She walked out into the sunlight, Caleb at her side. The 9 other men of the Unchained were scattered across the clearing, Ronan laughing with the twins, Elias studying a map with the Stone River elders, and the others sharing a meal with the very people who had once called them monsters. Amanda sat down on a fresh cedar stump, the warmth of the sun kissing her skin. A small, pale flower, the first of the spring, had pushed its way through the melting slush at her feet. She leaned down, gently brushing the ice away from its delicate petals, ensuring it had enough room to breathe. Beside her, Caleb shifted, not into the terrifying dire wolf, but into the massive black wolf of her first night. He settled at her feet, his heavy head resting on her boots. One by one, the others noticed the quiet. The hammers stopped. The saws went silent. Elias, in his snowy white form, trotted over and lay on her other side. Ronan, Finn, the twins, they all followed, shifting into their wolf forms and settling in a wide, protective circle around her. It was the nest again. But this time, it wasn't a refuge from a storm. It was a throne of living fur and chosen loyalty. Amanda leaned back against the solid warmth of Caleb's side, her hand resting on the silver fur of her guard, watching the first true sunset of a new era. The air smelled of cedar, damp earth, and hope. If the story of the lunar matriarch moved you, please show your support. This journey from a rejected Omega to a powerful queen is just the beginning. The blood moon is rising, and the real battle for the packs is about to begin. Like this video if you believe in second chances, share it with a friend who loves a good underdog story, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a chapter. Don't forget to hit the notification bell. The next part of Amanda's destiny is coming sooner than you think. Tell us in the comments, what would you do if you found 10 wolves guarding you? Thank you for watching.